Barnaby Jones handed one teenager his first acting job. 46 years later, that teenager won his third Academy Award. 4 people in these credits are dead now, and one of them was the most famous child on Earth before he sued his own mother in open court. Number 1. Buddy Ebsen was 64 when this series went on the air on January 28, 1973, and 72 when the final episode aired 7 years later. He played a widowed private investigator who came out of retirement to hunt the man who murdered his son, then never went back into retirement again. Most other detectives that decade carried a weapon and a grudge. Barnaby carried a glass of milk. He ordered it where other men ordered bourbon. He never raised his voice, and he listened to frightened people the way a country doctor listens. Viewers believed him inside one episode. The worst thing that ever happened to Ebsen happened on the most famous film set in history. MGM cast him in The Wizard of Oz, first as the Scarecrow, then moved him to the Tin Man. 10 days into filming, in October of 1938, the aluminum dust in that makeup coated his lungs and he could barely draw breath. By his own account, the studio did not believe he was ill until a furious nurse intercepted the man sent to order him back to work. Jack Haley replaced him. No announcement was made, and his name appears nowhere in the finished picture. Ebsen had already refused an exclusive long-term contract, and the head of that studio, Louis B. Mayer, told him he would never work in this town again. He kept working for another 55 years. Before Hollywood, there was a brother and sister dance act billed as the Baby Astairs. Ebsen arrived in New York in 1928 with $26.65 in his pocket, landed a place in a Ziegfeld musical, and sent for his sister Vilma a year later. Then came the war, and Ebsen served in the United States Coast Guard from 1941 to 1946, doing damage control aboard the USS Pocatello. 3 marriages and 7 children followed. Ruth Cambridge gave him 2 daughters, Elizabeth and Alex, before their divorce in 1942. Nancy Wolcott gave him 5 more, Susanna, Catherine, Bonnie, Kirsten, and Dustin, across a marriage that ran 40 years. Dorothy Knott married him in 1985 and was still his wife when he died. Kirsten works today as the musician Kiki Ebsen. Buddy Ebsen died on a Sunday morning, July 6, 2003, at Torrance Memorial Medical Center in Torrance, California. He was 95. Respiratory failure took him, which is a quiet irony for a man whose lungs had nearly killed him once already under a coat of metal powder. He rests at Pacific Crest Cemetery in Redondo Beach. Neither of the 2 roles that made him a household fixture ever brought him an Emmy Award. His last appearance on a movie screen came in 1993 in the film version of The Beverly Hillbillies, where he walked on not as Jed Clampett but as Barnaby Jones. Barnaby solved every case with the calm of a man who had never lost anything. Ebsen lost the role of a lifetime to a poison nobody warned him about, then spent 6 more decades proving that studio wrong in front of the largest audience imaginable. Number 2 belongs to the woman who made that office feel like somebody's kitchen. Lee Meriwether played Betty Jones, the widowed daughter-in-law, for all 8 seasons. Her husband was the murder victim in the very first episode. She then went to work every day beside the father-in-law who had come out of retirement to avenge him. Betty grew from answering the telephone to running down leads and, in some episodes, carrying the case alone. She was 37 when the series began and 44 when it ended. Long before any of it, she was 19 and standing in Atlantic City. Her father, Claudius Gregg Meriwether, had died at 48 only weeks before the national pageant. She very nearly withdrew. Her mother and the pageant director, Lenore Slaughter, argued her out of it. With her father gone, there was no money for college, and the scholarship she had won would have to be handed back. She competed, and in September of 1954 she was crowned Miss America, the first winner ever crowned on live national television. Television kept her. She worked as a Today Girl on NBC, played Dr. Ann McGregor on The Time Tunnel, and put on the Catwoman costume for the 1966 Batman feature film when Julie Newmar could not. Betty Jones brought her 2 Golden Globe nominations for 1975 and 1976, and 1 Emmy nomination in 1977. The Television Academy record shows 1 nomination and no win. Her marriage to the actor Frank Alater began in 1958 and ended in divorce in 1974, which means it came apart in the middle of the series that made her famous. 2 daughters came from it, and her own mother helped raise them while the show consumed 8 years. At 51, she married the actor Marshall Borden in September of 1986, and that marriage has now run for nearly 40 years. Lee Meriwether is 91 years old today. She still walks onto convention stages to talk about a catsuit and a private detective. Her longest job was not the one people remember. She played Ruth Martin on All My Children from 1996 to 2011, 15 years, nearly twice the length of her run in that office. Buddy Jones spent 8 seasons as a widow whose husband died before the first commercial break. The woman playing her buried her father at 19, watched her own marriage end while the cameras rolled, and found a second marriage at 51 that has outlasted everything else here. Number 3 carried the heaviest history in the building, and almost nobody watching understood it. Jackie Coogan guest starred in a first-season episode called Sing a Song of Murder, broadcast on April 1, 1973. He was 58. To the audience, he was Uncle Fester, bald and round and grinning, borrowed from a comedy and dropped into a murder plot. The face was funny. Everything behind it was not. Coogan was the first great child star in motion pictures. Charlie Chaplin found him in a vaudeville house and cast him as the abandoned boy in The Kid, and by his teens, he had earned an estimated $3 to $4 million. Under California law at the time, every cent of a child's earnings belonged to the parents. On the 4th of May, 1935, Coogan was in a car on a mountain highway near Pine Valley when it left the road and rolled down an embankment. 4 people died. One was the 19-year-old actor Junior Durkin. Another was his father, John Henry Coogan, Jr. Jackie walked away with 2 broken ribs. Then the money vanished. By the time he reached adulthood, his mother and his stepfather, Arthur Bernstein, had spent nearly all of it, and the court record is specific about what it went on. Fur coats, diamonds, expensive cars. In 1938, Coogan sued them both, an act with no precedent, because no former child actor had ever taken his own parents to court over his earnings. Roughly $250,000 remained. After legal costs, he recovered about $126,000 of it. 1 year later, in 1939, the state of California passed the Child Actors Bill. Everyone calls it the Coogan Act. It forces an employer to lock away 15% of a child performer's earnings in a trust the parents cannot reach, and it is why a child star's money is protected in that state to this day. He lost his own fortune and won a law for every child who came after him. There was a war in between. Coogan enlisted in March of 1941, trained as a glider pilot, volunteered for the 1st Air Commando Group, and in 1944 flew British Chindit troops on a night landing behind Japanese lines in Burma. He married 4 times, the first to Betty Grable. His last marriage to Dorothea Lamphere began in 1952 and lasted until he died. One of his 4 children, Christopher, was killed in a motorcycle accident in 1990. Jackie Coogan died in Santa Monica on March 1, 1984, at 69. Cardiac arrest ended a long run of heart and kidney disease, strokes, high blood pressure, and dialysis. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. Uncle Fester was a joke the whole family could enjoy. The man wearing the makeup had already stood in a courtroom against his own mother and changed the law of an entire state, and the people laughing at him on a Sunday night had no idea. Tell me in the comments whether you knew that story. Most of us grew up with that face and never heard that the law protecting child actors carries his name. Number 4 went to work on this series expecting to be gone by the following week. Mark Shera appeared as Jedediah Romano Jones, called JR, and the part was written as a single guest slot. Shera said exactly that to the Wichita Eagle. The network liked what it saw beside a leading man now in his late 60s and turned one appearance into 93 episodes across 4 seasons. JR was the legs of the operation, the young one who could run and climb and take a punch while the man whose name was on the door did the thinking. Shera was born Mark Shapiro in Bayonne, New Jersey, on the 10th of July, 1949, which makes him 77 today. His previous job had ended badly through no fault of his own. He played Officer Dominic Luca on the police series SWAT, which ran from 1975 to 1976 and was canceled in the middle of a national argument about violence on television. Critics went after it for its gunfire and its shoot-first heroes, and that pressure is regularly named as a reason it ended. Lee Meriwether called him the perfect foil everyone needed, very witty, keeping the whole set in stitches. Then he stopped. Guest work carried him through the 1980s and 90s, and his screen credits simply run out around 2002. He has stayed out of public view ever since, and there is no reliable public record of where he lives or what he does now. J.R. Jones ran down every alley in Los Angeles for 4 years so that an older man could sit and think. Mark Shera then walked away from the industry entirely and has spent longer being private than he ever spent being famous. The next name originated one of the most recognized characters in American history, played him for 9 years, and lost him the moment audiences could see a face. Number 5 appears in the very first scene of the very first episode. William Conrad turns up in Requiem for a Son on January 28, 1973, playing Frank Cannon, the lead of his own CBS detective series, and he came back for a 2-part crossover in the 4th season. Cannon was everything Barnaby was not, heavy and growling and quick to anger, and putting the 2 men in one room was the whole sales pitch. The loud detective vouched for the quiet one. Here is what the industry did to him. Conrad originated Marshal Matt Dillon on CBS Radio's Gunsmoke and played him from 1952 to 1961. For 9 years, he was Matt Dillon to millions of Americans who had never once seen his face. When the network moved Gunsmoke to television in 1955, it cast neither Conrad nor his radio co-stars, despite a campaign to reconsider. James Arness got the part. Everything after that he built as a man who had already been told he was the wrong shape. He estimated more than 7,500 radio performances across his career. Directing came next, and narration after that, on The Fugitive and on Rocky and Bullwinkle. Cannon ran 120 episodes, Nero Wolfe followed, and then came 5 years as District Attorney Jason Lochinvar McCabe on Jake and the Fat Man. Before any of it, he flew fighters for the United States Army Air Forces and came out a captain. His personal life was 3 marriages. June Nelson from 1943 to 1957. Susan Randall from 1957 until her death in 1979, the mother of his son Christopher. Tipton Stringer, known as Tippy, from 1980 onward. William Conrad died in Los Angeles on February 11, 1994, at 73. His family said the cause was heart failure. He was buried at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. 3 years later, the National Radio Hall of Fame inducted him, and he was not alive to hear it. Frank Cannon closed every case in 50 minutes and sent the bill. The man playing him spent a whole career as the definitive version of a character, and somebody else got the face. Number 6 had a criminal record before he ever stood in front of a Quinn Martin camera. Nick Nolte guest starred in a second-season episode called Dark Legacy, broadcast on March 3, 1974, opposite Eileen Heckart and David Wayne. He was 33, unknown, and 2 years away from Rich Man, Poor Man, making him famous in a single week. The following January brought him back for a second episode. Rewind to 1961 in Omaha, Nebraska. Nolte was 20, a football player who had drifted through 4 colleges on athletic scholarships and washed out on grades. Police arrested him for selling counterfeit draft cards. He was convicted, and the judge handed him a prison sentence measured in decades and a fine of $75,000, then suspended all of it. Probation followed for the entire length of the Vietnam War, with a warning from the bench that any further arrest would put the original sentence back in force. The conviction also made him ineligible for military service. So, a young man carrying a suspended sentence walked onto the set of the most wholesome detective show on American television and played a suspect. Nobody watching knew. Decades later, there was a second collision, and that one everybody saw. On September 11, 2002, he was pulled over in Malibu after driving erratically, and tests showed the depressant GHB in his system. He checked into Silver Hill Hospital in Connecticut 3 days later. That December, he pleaded no contest and took 3 years of probation, which he completed. The arrest photograph became one of the most reproduced mugshots in the country. His work never stopped being extraordinary. 3 Academy Award nominations for The Prince of Tides, for Affliction, and for Warrior. He won the Golden Globe in 1992. 4 marriages, the most recent to Clytie Lane in 2016, a son named Brawley born in 1986 and a daughter named Sophia born in 2007. He is 85 years old today, and he has written about all of it himself in a memoir. The detective show was about people who get caught. Nick Nolte had already been caught at 20, sentenced, and released with a warning that followed him through an entire war. If people from this era matter to you, subscribing keeps these stories coming. There are cast members on this show that almost nobody has ever written about. Number 7 let Barnaby through the police tape for 7 years. John Carter played Lieutenant John Biddle from the 2nd season through the 8th, appearing in 85 episodes, more than anybody on this series apart from the 3 billed regulars. He had already been on the show once as somebody else entirely, a homicide victim in an early episode. Biddle stood in corridors and over bodies and delivered the facts flatly, year after year, and that patience is a great deal of why the show felt like police work instead of fantasy. Carter was born on the 26th of November, 1927, in Center Ridge, Arkansas, and he came up through serious theater. His professional debut arrived off-Broadway in Sandhog in 1954, and he reached Broadway the following year in Seventh Heaven. He acted in 3 Edward Albee plays, off-Broadway, and in Albee's revival of A Delicate Balance. Then he moved to Los Angeles and became a face nobody could name in film after film. He is in The Andromeda Strain and in Badlands. In Scarface, he plays a detective named Vic Phillips. Something happened in the 8th season that almost nobody noticed. Carter stepped behind the camera and directed 2 episodes of the show, including Run to Death, which aired on January 3, 1980. The man who had spent 7 years handing over the case was quietly running the set. He married twice. Barbara Williams, from 1955 to 1966, and 1 child came from that marriage. Kendall Fuel married him in 1993 and remained his wife until the end. John Carter died in New York City on May 23, 2015, at 87. Pneumonia took him. The New York Times death notice described an actor whose working life had been filled with roles across stage and screen, which says nothing about which ones. Lieutenant Biddle existed to give somebody else the answer. John Carter spent 60 years being the reason other people's scenes worked, and then directed the show that never once put his name in the opening titles. The last name on this list was 19 and had never acted on camera, and he got the job because of a man the industry had thrown away 25 years earlier. Number 8 is Sean Penn. He appears in an 8th season episode called School of Terror, first broadcast on December 20, 1979, playing a character listed only as Sam. It was his first screen appearance of any kind. He was born on the 17th of August 1960 in Los Angeles, which makes him 65 years old right now. The reason he was there is the story. His father was the director Leo Penn, and in the 1950s he had been called before the House Un-American Activities Committee and refused to name acquaintances. The studio that employed him declined to renew his contract. Motion picture work stopped, so he moved to the stage and then to directing television, on I Spy and Star Trek and Kojak. Leo Penn also directed for this very series. His episode, Indoctrination in Evil, aired on November 1, 1979, 7 weeks before his sons did. A man who had been shut out of the business used the show he was working on and put his boy into it. That single episode carried 2 other unknowns. Ed Harris is in the guest cast. So is Madeline Stowe. 3 careers that would run for the next half-century started moving inside the same hour on a detective series in its final season. 8 years later came the collision. On the 2nd of April, 1987, on the Los Angeles set of The Film Colors, an extra named Jeffrey Klein began photographing Penn and Robert Duvall. Penn objected and spat at him. Klein spat back. Penn punched him in the face repeatedly and had to be pulled off by crew and cast. The assault violated probation from an earlier battery charge. That June, a judge sentenced him to 60 days in county jail and a fine of $240. He surrendered in August and served 33 days. Everything since has been the work and the aid missions. Marriages to Madonna, then to Robin Wright for 14 years, which produced his daughter Dylan and his son Hopper, then to Layla George. A relief organization called CORE, which grew out of Haiti after the earthquake and ran the largest vaccination site in Los Angeles during the pandemic. 6 Academy Award nominations, 3 wins. The most recent arrived on March 15, 2026, and he did not attend the ceremony. Kieran Culkin picked it up on his behalf. The teenager in that episode had one scene and no future anybody could see. 46 years later, he was holding a third Oscar he could not be bothered to collect in person. The final case aired on April 3, 1980. It was the 178th. The man at the center of all of them was 72 that night.